There is an important question to answer, and far be it from me to say that this is the only answer. It's Judaism. But I'm going to give you an answer, and the question is, why are we doing this? In other words, why do we have a separate ceremony to give specifically a name to a Jewish child? For the record, it's done not only for young girls, it is also done for baby boys. At the moment of the Brit Milah, the circumcision, there is a separate ceremony right after the Brit Milah, right after the circumcision. It's called Kriyat Hashem. It's called the giving of a name. So why do we do this? One answer is, I think, so fitted for this morning. In 1967, after the Israelis reunified the city of Jerusalem, and after people went back to their homes to resume their lives, and the army was demilitarized to some large degree, the Israeli government then employed another army, this being an army of archaeologists. For those who have been to Israel over the past few decades will well know the rewards that had been reaped from this army of archaeologists, and in particular around the old city of Jerusalem. The archaeological digs are outstanding. She wants to go. Are outstanding. And at one point, as they were digging along the southern wall of the old city of Jerusalem, they came across a tripartite doorway whose stairs went to the Temple Mount itself. Now, of course, the archaeologists who saw this, they knew immediately what it was, but they didn't know that it actually was ever built, that it ever existed. They believed that it was apocryphal, that it was just fictional. They knew that the story around this was the story of Huldah. It's called Hulda's Gate. Huldah was a queen who had converted to Judaism, and she had bequeathed an enormous sum of money to have this tripartite gateway built, which then the ancient rabbis then asked the question, why tripartite? Why 3 gates? And they answer by saying the following. Truthfully, it could have been 1, people going up and down. Or it could have been 2, an ingress and an egress. But why 3? And they say like this. In front of 1 gate would stand those who were about to be married. In front of another gate would stand those who had just lost someone they loved. In front of the 3rd gate would stand those who had just given birth to a child. Which is to say, Maureen, Noah, Ayla, is that your child while she's your child. But the truth is your family is also our family. The strength of who we are as a people is only gleaned and built on the strength of the Jewish families that we have. It has been said, and rightly so, that a child who loses their parents is called an orphan, but a people who don't have children is an orphan. The Jewish people are far from being orphaned. Misha Berach Avatena Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Moshe v'Aaron David Shlomo Yereches Isha Yoledet Ves Bita Nodala B'Mazot Avikarei Shema B'Yisrael Ayla Bat Noah Chaim u'Miriam Yehi Ratzon She'yizkeh L'Gala L'Torah Chupama Asim Tovim V'Namar Amen. May God who bless our ancestors Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon, may he bless both Maureen and Noah, and the new daughter whose name amongst her people shall be known as Ayla Bat Noah Chaim v'Miriam. May the parents be privileged to raise their daughter to womanhood. May they live through her to see the blessings of Torah, of a chuppah, and a life of ma'asim tovim, of good deeds. And let us say Amen. Yevarech Adonai v'yishmerecha, ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, yisa Adonai panav elecha, v'yaseh lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and guard you. May the Lord show you favor and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you kindness and grant you all peace. And let us say Amen, and Mazel Tov.
Yamod Baruch ben Yaakov Chamishi. Torah reading continues on page 863, verse 6.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hambarah.
Baruch Le'Barach Olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Amrach Le'Olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Charbanu Mikol Amim V'Tana Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Avanim shlemot tivnei zvachana Elohecha vehalit alav olot lana Elohecha וזבחת שלמים ואכלת שם ושמחת לפני אלוהיך וכתבת על האבנים כל דברי התורה הזאת בהיטב וידבר משה והכהנים הלוויים כל ישראל לאמור הסכתו שמע ישראל היום הזה נטלם לנה אלוהיך ושמעת בקול אלוהיך ועשית מצוותיו וחוקיו אשר אנוכי מצווך היום.
Baruch Adonai Ambarah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Et Tamam Ve'acham Noten Balachem. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Yamod. Yisrael Pinchas ben Melech Shishi. The sixth aliyah can be found on page 864, verse 11.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Le'Barach Olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'Olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Charbanu Mikol Ha'amim V'Notan Lanu Es Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Vayetzav Moshe et ha'am bayom hahu le'mor. Ayla ya'amdu levarech et am al har grizim ba'avrechem et ha'yarden Shimon ve'Levi v'Yehuda v'Yisachar v'Yosef u'Binyamin ve'Ayla ya'amdu al ha'klala behar Eval Reuven Gad ve'Asher u'Zvulun Dan ve'Naftali ve'anu ha'Levim ve'amru el kol ish Yisrael koraham Arur ha'ish asher yaseh pesach masecha Tov Adonai Maseh Yedei Charash V'Sam Basateh Ve'anu Kol Ha'am Ve'amru Amen Aharur Maklei Aviv Ve'imo Ve'amar Kol Ha'am Amen Aharur Masi Gevur Ve'ehu Ve'amar Kol Ha'am Amen Aharur Mashkei Ve'Badarech Ve'amar Kol Ha'am Amen Arur Mate Mishpat Geretom Ve'almana Ve'amar Kol Ha'am Amen Arur Shochev Meshed Aviv V'Kigila Kanav Aviv Ve'amar Kol Ha'am Amen Aharu shochevim kol behema ve'amar kol ha'am amen Aharu shochevim achoto bat avivo bat imo ve'amar kol ha'am amen Aharu shochevim chotanto ve'amar kol ha'am amen Aru makereu basater ve'amar kol ha'am amen Aru lokech shochad lakot nefesh dam naki ve'amar kol ha'am amen Aru asher lo yakim et divrei haTorah hazot lasot otam ve'amar kol ha'am amen V'haya im shemot tishma b'kol Adonai Elohecha lishmor לעשות כל מצוותיו אשר אנוכי מצווך היום ונתנך Adonai Elohecha עליון על כל גויי הארץ ובאו עליך כל ברכות אלה והשיגוך כי תשמע בקול Adonai Elohecha ברוך אתה בעיר וברוך אתה בשדה.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emes V'chai Olam Atah B'tocheinu Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Yamod Gershon Chaim ben Yaakov Shvi'iyah. Seventh aliyah can be found on page 865, verse 4.
Baruch Adonai Ambarah.
Baruch Adonai Barach Olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'Olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher B'Charbanu Mikol Ha'im Ve'Natan Lanu Torah Terato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Baruch pi binecha fi admatcha fi femtecha shkar lefecha v'shotzonecha Baruch tanacha micharotecha Baruch ata bevorecha Baruch ata betzetecha.
Baruch Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher hanatan lanu Torah temet v'chai olam natan betochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Please rise for the Kaddish. Yitkadav yitkadash shemei rabba ve'alma divrach yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh b'chayechon u'b'yom echad u'chayei dechol beit Yisrael bagala bagala u'bizman kahari v'imeru amen Yehi shmei rabba mevorach Leolam lo me'almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitram v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudesha b'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'yalma v'meru Amen. You may be seated. Yitzchak Meir. Ben David Michel.
Ben David Michel, Maftir.
Maftir for today, we found page 865, verse 4. Baruch hu Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Baruch L'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Baruch v'bitnecha v'yirmecha v'behemtecha shgar lafecha v'eshtrotonecha Baruch tanacha misharotecha Baruch atah b'vorecha Baruch atah b'tzeitecha Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet chaylam tav dochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah Yamdu hamagbiya v'hagolel. Please rise to lifting and tying of the Sefer Torah. Doris Epstein? Okay. Just push down the leverage and then up. Bezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe livnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. The Torah for Parshat Kitavot can be found on page 874. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ata b'divreihem nemrim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'b'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek Kumi ori kiva orech ufod Adonai alayich zarach Ki hine achoshech yechase eretz v'arafel leumim ve'alayich yizrach Adonai uchvodo alayich yera'eh ve'achu goyim le'orech u'mlachim le'noga zarchech Se'i saviv einayich u're'i kulam nikbetzu va'ulach Banaich merachok yavou, uvenotaich al tate amana. Az tiri venahart, ufachad verachav levavech, yafech alaich hamon yam, chel goyim avolach. Shifat gemalim techasech, bichrei midan ve'efa, kulam mishpa yavou, zahavu levona yisau, utilot Adonai yevaseru, koton kedar yikabtzu lach, ele nevayot yesharatu nech, yalu araton mizbechi, ubetifarti yafaer. Mi ele kaabtu fena, v'chayonim al arubotehem, כי לי יכבו, ואוניות תרשיש בראשונה, להביא בנייך מרחוק, כספם וזהבה מטעם, לשם ענה אלוהיך, ולקדוש ישראל כי פארך, ובנו בני נכר חומותייך, ומלכיהם ישרתונך, כי בקצבי הכיתיך, וברצוני ריחמתיך. ופיתחו שערייך תמיד, יומם ולילה לא יסגרו, להביא אלייך אל גויים, ומלכיהם נהוגים. כי הגוי והממלכה, אשר לא יעבדוך יאבדו, והגויים קרוב יחרבו. כבוד הלבנון אלייך יבוא, בראש תטהרו תאשרו יחדיו, לפאר מקום מקדשי, ומקום רגלי אכבד. והלכו אלייך שכוח, בני מענייך, וישתחוו על כפות רגלייך כל מנעצייך, וקראו לך עיר אדוני, ציון קדוש ישראל. תחת היותך עזובה ושנואה ואין עובר, ושמתיך לגאון עולם, משוש דור ודור. וינק חלב גויים, ושוד מלכים תינקי, וידעת, כי אני אדוני מושיעך, וגואלך אוויר יעקב. תחת הנחושת אביא זהב, ותחת הברזל אביא כסף, ותחת העצים נחושת, ותחת אבנים ברזל, ושמתי פקודתך שלום, ונוגסייך צדקה. לא יישמע עוד חמס בארצך, שוד ושבר בגבולייך, וקראת ישוע חומותייך, ושערייך תהילה. לא יהיה לך עוד השמש לאור יומם, ולנוגה הירח לא יאיר לך, וילך אדוני לאור עולם, ואלוהיך לתפארתך. לא יבוא עוד שמשך, פירכך לא יאסף, כי אדוני יהיה לך לעולם, ושלמו ימי אבלך. ועמך כולם צדיקים, לעולם ירשו ארץ. נצר מתי, מעשה ידי להתפאר. הקטון יהיה לאלף, והצעיר לגוי עצום. אני אדוני בעיתה אחישנה. ברוך אתה אדוני מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות. אל הנאמן אומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, בדבר אחד מדבריך, אחור להשוב ריקם, כי המלך נאמן ורחמן אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון קבצנו, וללב נפש ראשי אברהם בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני, משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו בליהו הנביא עבדך, מלכות בית אבי משיחך. במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כסו לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו דרכים מכבודו. כי בשם קודשך נשבעת, לא שלך ונרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל נביאים ביום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יפרח שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
One of my favorite stories goes like this. There is a rabbi sitting in his office, and there are two men having a business dispute waiting outside. The rabbi's wife brings the two men, business partners who are having the dispute, and they sit down in the rabbi's office with the hope, of course, that the rabbi will resolve their conflict. So the rabbi is sitting at his desk. The rabbi's wife is standing by his side. The two men, the business partners having this difficulty are sitting in front of the rabbi. The first man tells his side of the story, and the rabbi says to him, well, I think you're right. And then the second man tells his side of the story, and the rabbi listens and says to him, I think you're right too. And then the rabbi's wife standing behind him says, how is it possible that both can be right? And the rabbi says, you're right too. In the world that we live in, the ability to find agreement is something that we shouldn't take for granted. In liberal democracies, we have areas where we don't agree necessarily with each other, generally in terms of policy, but we agree in terms of values. It's interesting to note that the Russian, British, Jewish political philosopher Isaiah Berlin, if you ever heard of him or read of him, he's a brilliant man. Berlin, in the book that he wrote called Against the Currents, puts the following example to explain to you this interesting kind of pot that we boil in as a society. He goes, very often, people in Western liberal democracies have many, more than two, but they have many values that we hold inside of ourselves. For example, people believe in freedom. And at the same time, people believe in equality. Now, when you actually look to manifest or create the conditions for these values to become real, they actually begin to clash against each other. I'll give you an example. If you believe in equality, then you know that there comes a time where you need to introduce legislation, laws, in order to ensure that everyone has an equal chance. I'm not speaking about equity. I'm speaking about equality. And so there are laws that are put into place that we accept because we understand that we need ways of promoting and ensuring equality for all human beings who live in our society. At the same time, we know that these laws that promote equality also impinge on our freedom. I can't just do whatever I want. I can't walk into the office one day and say, everyone who's left-handed, you're fired. Everyone who's over 35, go home. You can't do that. And we willingly give up some of our freedoms in exchange for that value. Berlin calls this the polarization of values. We believe in freedom and you believe in equality, but we give up a little bit of both in the pursuit of hopefully having something of both. This ability to compromise, you and I take it for granted, but you can't. Because on the other hand, the next question to think about is, what is the difference between principles and ideology? We in Canada, and like most of the Western world, we live in societies based on principles, on shared values. So I can give a little bit of my freedom in order to ensure that people can have access with greater equality to some things. I know that some equality is not going to be perfect because we need to preserve my freedom, and so forth and so on. But what's the difference between shared values and ideology? Ideology is different because when you believe in ideology over shared values, what do you say? An ideology is something that you believe in and of itself. And that any attempt or thought to compromise, to be flexible with my ideology, destroys it and it pollutes me. It's interesting to note, for example, that Yasser Arafat was not an ideologist. Now, I'm no fan of his. Nobel Peace Prize or not. You know the old Jewish joke where Yasser Arafat one evening had a terrible dream and he woke up and he went to a dream reader and he told the dream and the Arafat asked the dream reader, what does it all mean? And the dream reader says, well, it means you're gonna die on a Jewish holiday. And he goes, well, what holiday? And the dream reader says, I don't know what holiday, but any day you die will be a Jewish holiday. So I'm no fan of his, but remember that when the Israelis finally went into Lebanon in the first Lebanese war to displace the Palestinian Authority, the PLO from their attacks on Israel in the north, sounds like what we're living in now. Arafat in the end surrendered. He got on a boat with 400 other delegates, the upper leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They got on a boat and went to Tunisia. And what did he say to himself? I'll give up now, and hopefully I'll come back to fight later. But the people that Israel are fighting now are ideologists. They don't give an inch. Because if they give up an inch, their fear is that they will undermine their movement and they will pollute their identity. There is no difference between what they believe and in what their life is. In fact, you wonder, why do they want to die so badly? Because they believe that their death is just one other step towards victory. It's not a loss. It's a way of moving closer to where they want to be. The threats that Israel, the Jewish world, and the wider Western world faces is the face of those competitions between ideology and shared values. They cannot coexist. And that's the reason why the foe that Israel is facing is implacable and why the dangers are so great. Now, that said, I'm going to do something very un-Jewish. I'm going to give you not only one reason to be optimistic, I'm going to give you two. The first reason for optimism I want to share with you comes by way of some data that I read this past week from my dear friend David Frum. If you don't follow him, you should. It's interesting to note that in 1980, that Iran and Portugal had the same GDP. And Syria and South Korea had the same GDP. Today, Iran, although their population is 4 times the size that it was in 1980, their GDP is smaller than it was in 1980, and in Portugal, it has doubled in size. In the case of Syria and South Korea, I probably don't need to give you numbers for this, but I will. It was equally shared. They had a GDP of $61 billion each in 1980. Today, the Syrian economy it generates roughly $10 billion. It has contracted to that degree. South Korea is $1.8 trillion. When you think about what kind of society is successful, what kind of society is going to win, you listen not to words, you look at results. Israel this past week was able to enact not one, but 2 of the most stunning and audacious intelligence operations based solely on technology. And you can be rest assured that none of their enemies could have done a thing like that. And you can be rest assured that the continuing ability to outsmart, outthink, and also overperform in technological and military areas will always be on the side of societies that are built on shared values. Always. The second reason for optimism comes by way of a story that was told to me by a beloved teacher of mine. When we did the shul trip to Israel, we visited him, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. He founded the city of Efrat. Rabbi Riskin tells the following story. When he was a rabbinical student at Yeshiva University many years ago, he decided on the Shabbat that this Torah portion was read, Parshat Ki Tavo, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. He decided that he was going to walk over the Williamsburg Bridge and go to the synagogue, the shul of the Kloisenberger Rebbe of Sanz, this old Hasidic dynasty. He decided he would go to that synagogue to hear the Torah reading for that morning. And as if you listen carefully to the Torah reading, there's a section, there's only 2 of them in the entire biblical record. But there's, in the Torah section for this morning, is a list of what they call the tochachot, the curses. And there's a tradition, long-standing in the Jewish world, that when these curses are read, that the Torah reader's voice dips down. We don't say it too loud. As the Torah was being read in that synagogue, in that shul, on that Shabbat morning of the sons of Rebbe, and as the Torah reader lowered his voice for the curses, the sons of Rebbe screamed out, Hoicha, say it louder. And he screamed again, Heicha, say it louder. And everyone in the congregation thought that he had finally had a nervous breakdown. Because if you knew the story of the Kloisenberger Rebbe, you knew that his wife and 7 children had all been murdered by the Nazis in Hungary. And all the horrible things were being recited in these curses were the manifestation of the horrors that he had lived through. But he banged on the table again and he said, say it louder. And then he explained himself. He said, all the bad things have already happened. You don't have to be afraid of it anymore. Now it's time for the blessings. And the same is true for us. There's always something to be afraid of. But the choice to be hopeful is one that we have a right to make, because the bad has already happened and the good shall come. Shabbat Shalom.